Avengers Age of Ultron is garbage, folks.
Is it an alligator or a crocodile? I don't know the difference, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask.
Look at that. That is a werewolf, folks.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Den of Geek Presents Marvel Standom. I'm Mike Cicchini, the editor-in-chief of Den of Geek, and with me this week, Den of Geek News and Features editor Kirsten Howard, TV editor Alec Wajalid, and please welcome writer and media critic, Mr. Mic Wright. Mick,
Hello.
You do some interesting work in the pop culture space. Why don't you let everybody know what that is and where they can find you, because I think it'll give them a good idea of why you are the perfect guest for a show talking about Secret Invasion.
I thank you for having me on. I'm literally talking to you from a bridge in London. If you can hear, like, just a London bus just went past. I'm a media critic. I do mostly do stuff about police corruption, things like that. But I was a music journalist, and I do talk about Marvel quite a lot. I'm on It's Good But It Sucks quite often, so I like to talk about Marvel on there. And you asked me to come on here, I guess, because of that. And thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us, especially since you are clearly on some kind of potentially Skrully secret mission. So that's pretty cool. You're adding some real authenticity to our vibe this week. And you know what? And speaking of authenticity, I just want to point out that the Marvel Standom opening credits, folks, are not made by AI. They are made by our brilliant producer, Andrew Halley. So, look, obviously, I was not here for Secret Invasion Episode 1 last week because I was violently ill. But Kirsty, why don't you tell us what went down in Episode 2, and then we'll really kick this show into gear.
I can do. In the second episode of Marvel's Secret Invasion, we get a flashback to the 90s where Nick is recruiting the lost refugee Skrulls to his undiscovered spy plans. In the present day, Talos reveals that there are now 1 million Skrulls on Earth, and Gravik takes over as Skrull General in a secret meeting with several Skrulls posing as world leaders. Meanwhile, Rhodey rebuffs Nick's appeal for help, and Nick returns to his secret wife, who is one of the Skrulls we met in the 90s flashback scene. Oh, and Gravik is trying to create super Skrulls, but I'm sure that'll turn out fine.
I know that reaction to Episode 1 was, let's just kind of charitably say, muted, I felt. Personally, I felt like this episode was a big step up, but what did everybody else think of this one? Mick, let's start with you. I want to know your general thoughts on the show and the vibe so far, but specifically this episode.
Well, what it's had me thinking about is Winter Soldier and all of that kind of 70s paranoia, like Day of the Jackal, Day of the Condor, like kind of stuff, like where you have a lot of dark rooms, you know, parking garages, weird dark streets at night. I actually thought Episode 1 was good. My kid is 13. She liked it. She's like the best Marvel critic I know, because if she will watch a whole episode, then it's good. Like, there have been shows that she bugged out of. Like, she bugged out of Miss Marvel, surprisingly, but just didn't hold her attention. I like it because I like the show because I like a lot of shadows and darkness and intrigue. And I've been waiting for Skrulls to really be full. I mean, I know we had it in Captain Marvel, but it felt a bit sort of half-assed to me in that film. A lot of things about that film felt half-assed, particularly someone who grew up in the 90s. Even the 90s use of music in that film was a bit to me. This episode, I always love when we see how morally debased Nick Fury is, because it's really important to realize that he just will do whatever he needs to do. Because, like, he's not, you know, the thing for me is, like, Samuel L. Jackson, I always think back to Jules in Pulp Fiction. All Samuel L. Jackson characters have a kind of moral ambiguity to them, I think. That's definitely happening with Fury here. And I kind of like that he's, being a piece of shit, because like he's not a hero, he's an operator. And in my day job of dealing news reporting, I've met a lot of mercenaries, and Nick Fury's a mercenary, isn't he? He gets the job done.
Yes, and you know what,
That's what
Kirsty,
I
I think I think we should bounce right to Kirsty here, because Kirsty, in your review, which folks can read at dennygeek.com/Marvel, you speak pretty strongly to your feelings about how this episode casts Nick Fury. What do you think here?
I think it's pretty fascinating that Nick Fury is the villain of this show in a lot of ways. He's certainly not the hero. And I love that the show is doing that with his character. I do think they'll find a way to turn it around by the end so that Nick is in the best light possible going forward. But at the same time, I love that they're showing us that he's a bad guy that has used people, who is in the opening scene is essentially recruiting a child soldier with very little pushback. It's good stuff. A lot of the bits of this episode that I particularly like were the talky scenes. The scene with Nick and Rhodey, the scene with Nick and Talos, where they're just being allowed to talk and play off each other and maybe discuss things that don't seem too relevant, but they are relevant in the terms of their character development and also their relationship. And it feels like those things have been missing from many of these MCU shows, where we're bouncing to the next explosion or cameo or Easter egg, and trying to keep the energy up instead of actually, focusing on the writing and the characters and why we should care about them and making them flawed and complex. So I appreciated this episode a lot more than the premiere, which was pretty messy.
Alec, how about you?
I think I concur with Kirsten almost entirely.
Wow.
I was maybe not almost entirely.
Oh, okay.
I was spectacularly cranky about episode 1.
You were.
I thought it was so boring.
It sucked.
I did not understand why this needed to exist. Like, I feel like when you're judging Marvel properties, the question is this better than nothing? Because nothing's not that bad. Like, you can just like sit there and twiddle your thumbs. Like, it's not a bad way to spend 30 minutes to an hour. I thought nothing was far preferable to episode 1. But this, I'm starting to see the vision a bit in episode 2. And it comes down to exactly what Kirsten said, which is the writing. The script is just better. It's not great. It's not perfect, but it feels like the characters are actually characters and they have something to say. And I agree. These movies and this franchise is at its best when it's letting its characters play off of each other. That's supposed to be the advantage of having such a huge storytelling universe, as we get to live in these small moments between relative bit players like Fury and Rhodey. And that scene worked really well. Even the stuff that normally would seem kind of cringe or cliche, like Nick's line of "I'm Nick Fury, even when I'm out, I'm in." Like, that should be an enormous eye roll for me. But in context, it kind of works. This is a market improvement. I'm not fully on Team Secret Invasion yet. It still kind of strikes me as slight and unnecessary, but I'm seeing the shape now of a TV show that could be, and maybe will be, in the remaining 4 episodes.
I feel like you're all going to come back and realize that episode 1 was doing something that the whole series needed. I don't want to be a dick, but I will be. I think that Marvel fans often have this attitude with shows that if the first episode doesn't hit you straight away, that you think that they don't know what they're doing. And I think if they kill the arc on this, you'll come back to episode 1 and go, okay, they were slow burning that and that worked. But like, yeah. Also, Nick Fury saying cool shit is good. Like, he should say cool shit. Like, I like it when he says cool shit. I used to read the old Nick Fury comics when he was still white, and he used to say cool shit. Just say cool stuff. That's like what he's good at.
I don't know that I've ever had a complete turnaround on my feelings on, certainly not on a Marvel series from episode 1 to episode 2, the way that I did with this one. And, Mick, you have a point. I just felt that even with that perspective, episode 1 was just like so heavy-handed with its exposition. And I'm always being kind of mindful of, like, I was watching this going, oh man, this is going to feel like homework for people. You know what I mean? Like, what are casual fans gonna think?
You know what? But one of the reasons I watch these shows with my 13-year-old is that she consumes this stuff without all the like back knowledge that we have. And she thought it was funny and cool, and she enjoyed that people shapeshifted, and she loved seeing, like, she was like, oh, that guy was in Black Panther. Like, I remember that guy. Like, so I get it. And I've obviously, at a level of being a fan who's been a fan for a long time, I totally get what you're saying. And it should do better, but I gave it a lot of latitude because, for instance, loads of people hate Love and Thunder, right? But I went with her to see it at the cinema. She loved it. So the experience for me was great because she loved that film. Now, that film has loads of problems, but if the 12-year-old, when she saw it, likes it, I sort of think, hey, Marvel's doing its job, which is it's a fun universe. But you're all right. Everything you're saying is right. But then I'm also saying, hey, like a 13-year-old really liked it. So maybe like it can't be that bad.
We were discussing some of this last week, and in terms of like, can someone come to this and not have watched any of the prior MCU stuff and be a complete newbie and enjoy the show on that level? Do they care that Everett Ross is a Skrull? Do they care that Maria Hill's dead? Within that first episode, do those moments hit as much for somebody who's just watching the first episode of a random show as they do for somebody who's already involved in the MCU?
Who's doing that though? Like, who are these people? Because I don't understand why you'd want to watch it if you weren't in. This is like, I'm Nick Fury, I'm always in. Like, if you're a Marvel, you have to be a Marvel fan to watch this show. No one else is watching it. It's like, who the fuck watched Moon Knight unless they're a Marvel fan? No one. Like, no one came in blank for that.
But that's becoming part of Marvel's problem, though, is that, this is not the audience juggernaut that it once was. At some point, I think they have to start considering that there is a perception among the general public now, which was not the case, even 3 years ago, that, like somebody asked me on Twitter today, like, because I just like casually posted on Twitter, like, wow, I loved episode 2 of this, which I did not love episode 1. And somebody was just like, if I just know the broad strokes of Marvel, can I watch this? And I did actually say, you know what? I might not have said this after episode 1, but after watching episode 2, yes, you're good. I said the one thing that it would really help to have seen is Captain Marvel. But even episode 2 did a good job of kind of catching folks up on that. I'm trying to give this a pretty wide berth here, but I've been more and more mindful lately of like the perception among friends of mine who like Marvel but are not as all in on it as, say, we are, who are starting to go, yeah, I can't keep up with this stuff anymore. And I think that's something they need to address.
Maybe it needs to be more like the comics in the sense that you always have some properties that are a way in, right? And then there are some things that are for people who are hardcore into it. Because like, yes, we're kind of assholes about this, because one of the problems we have is like, we want it to like have loads of deep cut stuff. People do admit it. People want stuff to go, I am a big Marvel fan and I like to know, like, have some deep cut stuff. And then we also say, oh, casuals won't like this. And I don't really know what Marvel's meant to do, because you want some hardcore stuff, right? You want some hardcore stuff. And then you also want to talk about this like imaginary like person who's never seen stuff. I also think first comic I remember reading really, really religiously, apart in DC, it was Death of Superman arc, right? Which is amazing. And it's terrible, but it's amazing. Rise of Superman is awful. There's lots of reasons to say it's awful. But in Marvel, it's Maximum Carnage, right? And I didn't know anything about symbiotes. I didn't know anything about symbiotes or anything like that, right? And I just kind of learned. And I didn't have the internet to do that. I just read comics and basically went, okay, Carnage is really horrible. Venom's like horrible, but not as horrible. So like sometimes we have this expectation that people are stupid or people won't do the homework. Sometimes you've got to do the homework. Marvel's a really big universe. Fucking do the homework. Sorry, if you won't do the homework, it isn't for you. It's not like Disney doesn't have lots of properties you can join in with. So I don't know. I think we're sometimes too harsh on them. But am I being the contrarian here? I suppose so. It's because I'm a Skrull.
Look, usually it's me. Just one last point on this is that the idea that this episode really hammers home just how we could charitably say morally ambiguous Nick Fury is Nick Fury is suddenly a better villain than like 90% of actual MCU villains. And I think that's great. And the fact that I'm still rooting for him, the fact that I'm still kind of like, well, yes, he was manipulating these people, but I think there was also a certain like he did also like truly embrace them and their culture to some degree, where he really does believe that he's doing the right thing. He didn't necessarily know that there were going to be a million of them on the planet. Like, this is one of the more nuanced looks at any major character in the MCU that we've seen in a long time. I have genuinely conflicting feelings about, cheering for him in those badass moments, like when he's dealing with Rhodey. I thought the conversation with him and Talos on the train was both compelling and uncomfortable. It's good stuff. Like, I'm really pleasantly surprised this time around.
Now, this is my fault, but I you probably talked about this in the past, right? But who's your favorite Marvel villain in the film so far? Because for me, Zemo is one of the best, and I love that because you look at him and you go, yeah, you're kind of right. And in Black Panther as well, you see a villain and you go, yeah, you're basically right. There, for me, it's always the best time when you can find yourself saying, well, actually, I can see their point. The worst villains are where it's like cartoonish and it's like, I want to destroy the universe. And you're like, oh yeah, whatever.
Yes, I think
Maybe.
Killmonger is at the very top. I think Zemo's fantastic. Oh, look, I thought Thanos was great. I think Thanos was an incredibly effective on like every level, but there's been a trend, and we've talked about this on the show before. Like there's also like very much a trend in the MCU of kind of like sanding the edges off the villains and making them lovable. Whereas here with Nick Fury, we have a character that we are ostensibly supposed to root for, and now they are making it harder and harder to do that. And I think that's a really nice change of pace. Should we talk about those opening credits, or should we move deeper into the uncomfortable political messaging of this show?
Yeah, I think in my review initially of the first episode, I said that the opening credits looked pretty great. It wasn't until I was watching it on my TV afterwards, because I'd watched it on like a screener on my tablet, and it was quite small and I couldn't really see them, but I thought, oh, the colors are nice, these are nice paintings. It wasn't until it was like suddenly, with the magic eye painting coming into focus when I watched it on the 43-inch TV or whatever downstairs, when it was on Disney Plus, and went, hang on a second, I'm not sure about this, guys. This might be a bit a bit controversial, and I guess it was, well, at least online. I'm sure normal people don't care about this, but they did get into a bit of hot water on social media and stuff from people who weren't happy with them using AI for the opening credits on this one. They had their thematic reasons for doing so, but it's upset a lot of artists, especially in the climate that we're in at the moment, with overworked VFX artists and people on strike.
We should absolutely stand against Disney doing this, 100%, because it only goes in a bad direction for artists. And I just, I write a lot about AI stuff. My wife is an expert in AI, like she's an academic who writes about it. And we were talking about creativity in AI today. And AI isn't creative. AI is like a parrot, like a horrible parrot. And Disney should know better than to do that. The amount that Marvel relies on VFX artists to make incredible stuff, like, the best films have the best VFX, and sometimes Marvel's cheaped out on VFX, and we as fans have said that, when you see it and you think this VFX is dog shit, and it's dog shit when you go cheap. Like, you need great artists to make great work, and superhero films need really good VFX, because the suspension of disbelief is a higher level for a superhero world,
Absolutely agree. I mean, like never mind the fact that it's like, hey, read the room, guys. Like the timing couldn't have been worse. If the climate was different, I can see a world where they're like, oh yeah, we deliberately did this so that it's unsettling and weird and blah, 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 blah. But like, no, screw that. Somebody pointed out, even something as relatively simple, quote unquote, right, as the Jessica Jones opening credits. They showed like the number of people that it took to make those compared to the number of people that were credited just to make the credits on Secret Invasion. and it's not comparable, like it is absolutely a case of artists not getting work, not getting paid when they should. It is a Rubicon that the biggest brand in entertainment is crossing at the worst possible time.
And it'll be scriptwriters next. There was a good review in Sight and Sound about talking about Citadel, the Amazon property, and saying this could have been written by AI. It's so generic, right? And we are going to get to a point, particularly with stuff that's action orientated, where they will get AI to write the script. And look, I'm a professional writer, and I do not want we all are here, I think. We do not want AI writing stories because it will become so generic. And Marvel already gives us a lot of generic shit, so we should really stand against this.
This is the line in the sand. And, Marvel, like the Marvel brand, going all the way back to Jack Kirby, has been screwing artists. And I feel like this is not the same, but it is definitely part of that lineage. And like it has to stop. And the fact that controversy happened the same week that they released that absurd Stan Lee infomercial on Disney Plus, where it's like, once again, Saint Stan taking credit for for all the work that was really done by Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and who else. Like it was just, again, read at minimum, read the room, guys.
And the Kirby and Ditko families, how much shit are they expected to go through? At a certain point, how much are we gonna stop pissing on those legacies? And the only way to stop Disney just cares about money. So we have to make it clear to them that we won't buy this stuff if it's not made by real people who give a shit and care. Alan Moore has got lots of issues, but he's been saying it for years about DC and the way DC treats, say, the Watchmen property. We need to think about this and say, only great stuff gets made by people who make creative leaps. Like some of the best stuff and the best comics come from people who made stuff that no one was thinking of. And Guardians wouldn't be the way it is if there hadn't been some wild choices in those comics. Who thought Rocket would be such a big character? Not many people.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the political themes of this show. And the thing that struck me in episode 1 was right out of the gate, you had that paranoid rant from that guy about, it's like, oh, okay, so this is something where you have the type of person who is clearly presenting a certain side of an argument about refugee crises and things like that. And of course, as we go on, and particularly in episode 2, we're starting to see a more nuanced element to this. And Marvel is not always great with their political messaging. There's definitely some of that here, but I feel like we are seeing more and more of the kind of, what they're actually trying to say, as opposed to what it seemed like they were saying at first. But I wonder what other elements, we can see here. Captain America and the Winter Soldier, for example, was very much a product of the post-war on terror, post George W. Bush years in the United States, and the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything that was related to that. So I'm curious, where people see this show reflecting our current political moment.
Do you know the thing that always got me with Winter Soldier is they didn't follow it through well? I know they sort of did in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I felt like we had a reset in a way. I don't think that even now, even in Secret Invasion, Fury hasn't got this thing of God, I worked for basically Nazis for years. That hasn't followed through enough. And I will say, as someone who deals with police corruption a lot in the real world, that the paranoid rant is not too far from the reality of things. I mean, what you should go back to is, President Eisenhower, when he's stopping being president, says, beware of the military-industrial complex. This is a huge problem. You can't have this. And so he'd been a general in World War II, and then he was president, and he went, hey, guys, this is some shit, and you need not to do this. No one paid attention, and that's where we are now. And the mad thing with Marvel, and therefore Disney doing it, is that they've got DeSantis really screwing with the kind of easy access to money and power that Disney have had for a long time. DeSantis won't be president because Disney won't allow it. So that's interesting, right? Disney's kind of in its own way, it's evil empire, right? Like Disney will not be screwed with. Disney has incredible political power. Disney basically owns Florida. It's interesting, right? So when Disney does political things about conspiracy, I do slightly go, well, your original founder was a Nazi or at least a fascist, and you have a lot of political power. And then you do these things that are about paranoia and politics. But really, you know, if Disney doesn't want someone to be president, he will not be president. And I guarantee you, DeSantis doesn't get to be president. He went for Disney. What a mug. What an absolute rube. That was a big mistake.
I can think of about a dozen reasons that DeSantis won't be president. But
oh yeah, he's a shit politician. He's no good. But it was so interesting. But you know, Disney had loads of carve-outs. People need to look up the way that Disney World and Disneyland basically function as like separate states. It's fascinating. Like their cops can do whatever they want. It's crazy.
The politics of the MCU in this show in general are kind of like incomprehensible just because of there's so many cooks in the kitchen and there's so many different creative voices from project to project. Because at the end of Captain Marvel, Skrulls are very clearly refugees, people who need help in a home. And there's still that here, but now there's like this evil, seedy underbelly of this refugee crisis that's going to kill people. The politics of Marvel movies are kind of all over the place, and I think that just reflects how many people work on them. In this case, at least, I kind of like how they're approaching the geopolitics of it all more so than the spy thriller aspect. Because we've talked about, you know, this is a paranoid thriller, Days of the Condor, Spies, Winter Soldier, and all that. I feel like aside from that opening, like Charlie Day with the chalkboard and It's Always Sunny scene, we haven't gotten a lot of like that sense of paranoia, even though a Skrull could be anybody. But what we have got are like some kind of interesting geopolitical reactions. I kind of like how much of a dick Rhodey is now. Like he is incredibly American and like really like parroting the party line of like, I'm here in London because I want to be here, not because I was summoned. Now listen here, you little European peasants. That rings true to me. And I think that adds something to the show and adds something to the characters. And I think the show is operating better on that geopolitical level now than it is with its Skrull storyline and then than it is with its kind of paranoid thriller aspect.
Yeah, there's the sort of the Skrull paranoia element of it is occasionally quite outlandish. You know, at the end of the day, these are, you know, people running around in goofy green masks or whatever, and there's a very dour tone to the rest of the show. So it could have tonal issues if you wanted to see it that way. And there is the scene in this episode where, you know, Gravik goes and we find the world leaders and the media spokesman from the US. I forget his name, but it's Christopher McDonald, right? Who's terrific in so many things. I just love him. And they're sitting around the table and it could all be very ridiculous. But I feel like Kingsley Ben-Adir, his performance is so good and so like sort of like low-key blistering, you know, where you can tell that he is just absolutely single-minded about this and he has been planning this for so long and he is so fraught with like rage and the desire to just get something done. And I feel like a lot of people, especially, you know, who have become sick of the system and the way things work for them, I think anyone can relate to that on a basic level where you just like, the system isn't working. The things that we were promised aren't coming. In fact, they're taking more from us every day. What can we do? It's easy to empathize with where he's coming from, even though we don't know the depths of his issues with Fury just yet.
I think there's a couple of things where this if you want to go outside of the world of the show and say there are two ways this can be looked at, like it can go very left-wing political or very right-wing. It sort of reminds me of They Live, right? Because I refer to They Live a lot because I think as a media critic, They Live's a really good text saying, you know, there's the outer message and the inner message. There's the underlying, there's the subtle message and there's the overall, the shouted message. But the trouble is They Live is also used by anti-Semites and like psychotic people on the right to talk about like lizard people, right? And I think the problem with Skrulls as a concept, when you have people on the right on the internet, is a lot of stuff around like Pizzagate or Bohemian Grove is weird, right? It is weird. That definitely is weird. But there is a lot of conspiracy theories about like hidden elites, right? And the worry for me was with the Skrulls being, as Alex said, the Skrulls having previously been refugees in very clearly just refugees in Captain Marvel, is when you make them baddies in this, to the real life politics, the worry is that you start to frame refugees as the enemy within, the danger within. And I think Disney has to be very careful with that, because it almost becomes a right-wing text that says, yeah, when you allow, you know, to talk about it from a British perspective, the Muslims into the country, right? They're all dangerous kind of thing. And of course, the fact is, we actually know that refugees are economically very positive for a country, socially very positive for a country. Of course, you always have some issues, but broadly, you know, immigration is good. Bringing in refugees is good. And so I think Marvel needs to be really careful with this, because the right could enjoy this as a text that allows them to play all sorts of games around the dangerous other, right? And of course, Secret Invasion, Skrulls, all this kind of stuff was like pre 9/11. All of this stuff is comic book stuff from pre 9/11 or you know, early 2000s kind of stuff. And I do worry about it from that perspective. And I know that's like a real downer on a show about like comic book TV shows, but that stuff, that storyline, they need to be really careful about. And I think it helps that Talos is a good guy, you're right, and there are good Skrulls, but it's risky.
We've been talking about this, you know, that the messaging in episode 1 did feel like if you invite refugees into your home, they will eventually steal your jobs or lives and then become violent. Or it didn't seem like Marvel. What my worry is that Marvel can't be trusted with an issue like that in a limited series that they're pouring, you know, millions and millions of dollars into. I really hope that I'm wrong and that they, you know, follow through or at least develop it in an interesting way, but it is a worry.
Look what they did with Scarlet Witch and Grief, right? I've always thought Scarlet Witch, even in the comic book thing with that, it's like grief makes women irrational and murderous is the vibe for that, right? And I've never enjoyed that. I never enjoy what they did with Scarlet Witch in X-Men comics or in the films, because like I like the Scarlet Witch and I think she's a good person and she's been through trauma, and Marvel's attitude to trauma is it turns you murderous and you might murder everyone. That's kind of fucked. They do play with things on a level that's too cheap sometimes. I've always thought about it with Uncle Ben, even like, because really Peter shouldn't feel guilty about that. It's not his fault. It comes back to Uncle Stan, like, you know, that Mike was saying, like Stan loved to say, oh, you know, make these characters and they're really realistic. But actually often Marvel plays very fast and loose with really serious stuff which has implications that it doesn't take into account, you know? Even like think about Peter and Gamora, like Peter's like into this Gamora that's never been into him. And it's like, kind of like, I'm a nice guy, you should be my girlfriend again. No, she doesn't fucking know you. Chill the hell out, man. It's kind of creepy and weird. And it sort of says to a bunch of sad Marvel fans, oh, women should like be into you even though they don't even know you exist. Like, I don't know. There's all kinds of implications, and script writers need to think a bit harder about it. This coming from me, who at the start was like, Secret Invasion is really good. It is, but it's got loads of issues.
We wear everyone down eventually, Mick.
Yeah.
I knew I'd get you in the end. The challenge with doing political allegory in like a comic book context is that a lot of comic book characters and creatures are actually very dangerous. This is going to sound like weirdly racist for a creature that doesn't exist, but by its actual like DNA is inherently deceptive. Like it can change into something else. They're very challenging for humanity to deal with. Whereas in our real world, like refugees are human beings. They're literally people. It's like in X-Men when, like, remember the senator in X-Men, Bryan Singer's X-Men 1, where he makes the point of like, do you want someone out there who can phase through walls into your kitchen, like without you knowing about it? And I can see how that plays to the average person in the Marvel universe, like the average Midwestern voter.
isn't this the Slytherin problem, right? Which is like J.K. Rowling, right? Like her problems are many, right? But that she then later on in the books has to try and justify, like, oh no, there's some good Slytherins, you know, like actually, like, you know, it's actually that their cunning is good. Like, often we write these characters that are like just bad, right? And then you have to try and backpedal really hard and explain, oh, there's kind of some good ones because the allegory is really screwed up, right? Because Harry Potter doesn't work, because basically you go, oh, we have a whole house that's just dickheads. Like, this is the house of the evil dickheads. And when the Battle of Hogwarts happens, we have to put them in the basement because they're such dickheads. Whereas like Skrulls, what they did well in Captain Marvel was to say, hey, some Skrulls are kind of fun. Like the switch of saying some Kree are assholes and some Skrulls are actually nice. Good, that was good, but now they're kind of undermining that. And that's difficult because you sort of go, okay, Talos is cool, but like, oh, he got 1 million people. The number thing is odd as well, right? Because the fascists love to talk about we're being swamped by refugees. And the problem that Disney's created here is 1 million Skrulls swamping Earth. That's fucked when you talk about it as a kind of, you know, a thematic thing. Because actually 1 million people is nothing. 1 million Skrulls is nothing. You could easily fit 1 million Skrulls on Earth. And also, frankly, at this point, hasn't Earth been used to like alien invasion? Couldn't all the governments just go, oh, we have these dudes, they're our friends, here they are, they're like these green dudes, and everyone be like, oh yeah, okay, because we remember when aliens tried to destroy New York, and we're kind of cool with that now. Sometimes if you play the logic out, it doesn't work. The best thing they could do is say, okay, come and live here. Like we gave the Asgardians like New Asgard, right? How are the Asgardians worse than the Skrulls? Right? The Asgardians, and actually, Jesus Christ, the allegory is horrible, because what you're saying is Skrulls are green, colored people bad, Asgardians basically white. I know, like, we had Heimdall, but Heimdall's dead by the time they have New Asgard, right?
There's Valkyrie.
And there's Valkyrie,
and
yeah. But they all look like humans. Okay, but in this allegory, they all look like humans, right? Skrulls don't, so they're the other. And this is all about othering, and that's kind of screwed up.
Well, but it plays historically in the US. I mean, in World War II, we rounded up the Japanese on the West Coast, you know, and like, why were they rounding up the Japanese as opposed to the German? Like, they weren't rounding up German Americans. They weren't rounding up my grandparents. They weren't rounding up Italian Americans. We were at war with Italy too. Like, it's pretty obvious. Like,
and what's screwed up about it is George Takei is still here talking about that.
Yeah,
he's still alive,
and
talking about it, saying I was a kid and you did this to me.
It does kind of play historically, and I will say, look, this is going to be like, the discourse around this show is going to be difficult, and it should be.
Yes.
But it does help that they have made the villain of the series pretty compelling so far. You know, like this is another one of those cases where I'm like,
but you are going to have the discourse that the villain of the series is an African-American man. Why is it not a white dude doing it? Because predominantly it's white dudes who have suppressed refugees, not African-American people. So there's that whole thing. And then because, of course, you go back and it's like it was a good choice to make Nick Fury African-American, but now now it's complex because he's an African-American man who is a agent of the state doing state violence. So that's complicated. I just wanted to talk about comic books.
I do like that the show is unpicking the legacy of Nick Fury as the man who put together the Avengers and helped save the world, and is showing his flaws and his mistakes through the eyes of the people he's wronged. I'm not sure this series can handle those themes, but we'll see what happens in the next 4 episodes and take a look back. Maybe like Mick says, even that first episode will run a lot smoother and we'll look back on it more warmly.
What I love about Den of Geek is you do these great recaps of like episode by episode, but then every time when you get to 6 episodes or 9 or 10 episodes, once you can come back, and then often episode 1 you look at in a different light based on episode whatever the last episode, right? But, you know, I'm not going to say that what you do for a living is bad, because I love it and I'm a big fan. I love reading the recap. But you always have to look retrospectively, don't you? Because, like, I really wasn't sure how WandaVision was going to stick the landing, and it did. So, and I actually thought that Falcon and Winter Soldier was better than most people think it is. So there's, you know, it's different. You know, we all have our sort of vibe with this, don't we?
I think we do. We do that in life. You know, we process things day to day, and then we look back a few weeks later, a few months later, a few years later, and we see things that we did differently, and we see things that we consumed differently. But I don't think there's any harm in talking about it in the moment or retrospectively or looking forward at things.
But that's the fun of it, right? That's
right,
what being a fan is good.
Exactly. But, you know, I do get comments on my reviews, and always have, which people like, why are you reviewing it for an episode? You don't know what's going to happen next, you know. Why can't we look back at the series at the end? That makes more sense.
But shouldn't you then, like, you could honestly just say, do you know how many people want to read these? Because, you know, like, people really want to every time I watch an episode, I immediately go and read what people have to say about it. I hate that kind of thing, because in reality, you know, it's why sites like Den of Geek exist, because people want to analyze this stuff in real time. Of course they do. We can do both. It's good. It's fun.
Yeah.
Maybe we take it too seriously. We said after we talked about racism and everything, and, like, you know, the history of America. But again, that in itself is fun.
Sorry, just sent me that Andrew surreptitiously put the denofgeek.com/Marvel sign on the screen during that. I don't know whether anyone wants to talk about Super Skrulls. I put it on the run of show. This would be the fan portion, basically, of the show where we talk about comics.
I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
So, as a non-comic reader, and as somebody whose introduction to Skrulls was Captain Marvel, how do Skrulls work? It seems like they need to acquire DNA or something, because when in that comic we read, Meet the Skrulls, at one point the father gives the daughter a little watch to better assist in her transformations. In this show, I think it implies that the new Skrull can't transform into just anybody. He has to meet that American guy that he is impersonating first. But later on, somebody impersonates, or the bad guy impersonates Nick Fury pretty effortlessly. And then now we're collecting DNA to make Super Skrulls. What is the science of Skrulls?
I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay. I'm glad we're all on the same page.
I'm not the Skrull scientist, Alec. Come on.
All right.
It's like anything in Marvel. It's whatever suits the plot.
Correct. I do like that, you know, in the comics, basically the Super Skrull in the comics is one who has the powers simultaneously of each member of the Fantastic Four, where obviously they can't do that here. So we see on the screen like how they are building their Super Skrulls from existing characters in the MCU. Like, you know, we see Groot, we see Cull Obsidian, you know, there's Extremis Tech involved. So I think this is like just good old-fashioned MCU reverse engineering of, you know, like a concept that the actual comic book version does not fit in the moment. So they're finding another cool way to do it. And I am looking forward to seeing how they pull this one off.
Is this going to draw in some Fantastic Four shit, or give us some, like, you know, kind of foreshadowing Fantastic Four coming? I know it's still a while off, but it feels like Skrulls was so big in Fantastic Four. It feels like that's something they're going to bring us at some point.
I mean, Kirsty has watched me for 3 years now look between the lines for any hint of actual Fantastic Four stuff. I will say, and I have to think this was intentional, because the Skrulls of the MCU are so different in terms of philosophy, portrayal, et cetera, so different from the Skrulls of the comic, right? But during the flashback, when Fury is giving his speech about, you know, why the Skrulls should follow him, and he's making his promises and whatever, he says, this involves you putting on a new face and keeping it. And I have to feel like that is kind of a sideways nod to the very first Skrull story, which was like, was that Fantastic Four #2, which ended with Reed Richards tricking the remaining Skrulls on Earth, basically being like, okay, like you can live out your lives not in captivity, but you're going to stay in one form. And he turned them into cows, like, so they're like 3 Skrull cows, like forever. Yeah. So I feel like what Fury was doing here was, I feel like that was kind of like a sideways nod to that. And then like the torture scene taking place in a meat locker, where I'm pretty sure there are 3 cows hanging there. I feel like this was a nod to that very, very first Skrull story, without them having to like really engage with how different the Skrulls are. And rightfully so. I think they're way more nuanced and way more interesting in the MCU than they are in the comics.
They are going to have to feed in some Fantastic Four stuff soon, surely. Like, and I guess we're getting them from the multiverse, right? I don't know, but I assume that they just come from another dimension, because people keep saying we're not going to get an origin story, but I feel Skrulls must be the way in, because Skrulls were massive in Fantastic Four, like always.
But they're also saying they're not going to put Doctor Doom in that movie. So who the hell
Oh,
knows?
I hate that stuff. Come on. Latveria, Doctor Doom. That's what we need. The last time I did It's Good But It Sucks was about the last terrible Fantastic Four film, which is a kind of good sci-fi film if it's not a Fantastic Four film. But God, can't you do Doctor Doom right? Just do Latveria. It's like Doombots and Doom. I want that. It's such a fun character if you do him right. And now the nerd has come out.
The best Marvel character.
Yeah, I love Doom. Doom's amazing. Also, I love MF Doom, and like there's so many great samples from that Fantastic Four cartoon on his song. So anyway.
And then, of course, there's the ending of this episode where we finally meet Priscilla Fury. She's a Skrull. And in fact, she seems to be, is that the same Skrull who, introduced him to child soldier Gravik earlier in the episode?
Yeah, I think it was. We have been told in The Winter Soldier that Nick Fury is married, but we've never met his wife, and now we have. And I don't know how she's put up with him, if I'm honest. Like if my husband had promised me a new home planet and 30 years later hadn't delivered, that'd be more than like, picking up some undies off the floor with some skid marks in and having to put them in the laundry hamper or something. That's some shit that would ruin a marriage. I don't understand how it's lasted this long.
And who got snapped and who buggered off to a space station for ages. Right. Like the man is a pain in the ass.
Terrible husband.
But we do get our first Otis Redding needle drop, which is pretty cool.
I knew that's all you would care about.
You would know this. Who sampled that Otis Redding song into a really good rap song? I can't remember.
Kanye West and Jay-Z.
There we go.
I'm very curious to learn more about her, because anybody, as Kirsty mentions, like, anybody that could put up with Nick Fury for 30 years has to be pretty remarkable herself. And, despite the fact that this show does seem to be very much about Nick Fury, being morally ambiguous at best, this is a fascinating character. This is a riveting Sam Jackson performance. Even that last little low-key surprise, I love that was the note they chose to end on, rather than, and here's another like surprise Skrull reveal, or you know what I mean? Like, I thought like ending with that warm embrace with husband and wife was a very, very different touch, and another indicator of the approach this show is taking.
They have to be careful with the Skrull reveals. Don't do too many, otherwise we'll just get bored.
Any final thoughts or theories before we sign off for today, folks?
I've just been dying to mention that a 2,000 person death count that Rhodey notes could possibly triple once all the wreckage is cleared is insane for that attack in what was essentially a small public park in Moscow. Potentially 6,000 deaths is 2 9/11s from just like a couple of bombs in a public park that Nick Fury stood next to one of them and was not exploded.
Didn't you text me after you'd watched it and said that the death toll was like 10,000 or something? You were like, that's 3 9/11s. I was like,
so, yeah, that's always the metric. Is the 9/11's the baseline? It's 2 9/11s because they say 2,000's the reported death total. Rhodey says it could triple once the debris is cleared. So that is 2 9/11s. I just had to get that off my chest. I've been just
You know what the problem there is? It's the problem we always have, right? Which is that Marvel shifts the power levels all the time. It's like whenever the Hulk has a fight, right? Because we know from the comics the power of the Hulk, but sometimes you have to have the Hulk be underpowered because the fight wouldn't work. Like Thor versus the Hulk is always interesting, right? Because we know their power levels from comics, and really the fight in Ragnarok wouldn't be. There's no balance to that. I think it comes back to when we're talking about the Skrulls and saying, well, how does Skrull science work? Ultimately, whatever works. And I have talked to Tim Wernton about this before, where I said, basically, sometimes we just sort of have to go, if it works for the story, it works. If the internal logic of this series works, then you kind of go with it. But you're right, the 9/11 thing's crazy. Like how many people are at a German market? I've been to German markets, it's crazy.
I mean, it has to be big enough to trigger an actual war between, so you're right. It is about the
I
internal
think
logic.
they should have done a massive festival or whatever, but then of course you come back to the actual logistics of filming, and they went, well, what can we film? And then you don't want to think about that too much, because when you start thinking, well, what could they afford, or what was the budget? That's a bad vibe. Like, you can't get into that mentally, because then you're totally out of the show. But Alex, totally right. That just made no sense and was dumb as shit. But we just let it slide, I guess.
That's the least of the show's problems right now.
Yeah, my final thought is, based on everything we said today, and it's actually been quite nice to talk it through, because as I've gone along, I've thought more about it. I still think it's a fun show. I do think it works. I like paranoid stuff. So because I spend my whole time dealing with real conspiracies and real corruption. So it's sort of a vibe I'm into. But can it stick the landing? Probably the hardest landing of any TV show so far. I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But when we're talking about the politics, I do think it matters. I do think that refugees in the real world have a shit time. And I want Marvel to stick the landing. And I don't want it to be just evil Skrulls, because that would be very disappointing. And I think they really have to do something very nuanced. And can they manage it? Hard to say at the moment.
The jury is out.
Yeah.
We shall see.
Nick, before we sign off, why don't you remind folks where they can find you, where they can read your work?
Yeah, I'm at Broken Bottle Boy on Twitter, and you can get me on Substack, brokenbottleboy.substack.com. Thanks a lot for having me. I've had a great time.
Of course. Thanks for being here, folks. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to follow Den of Geek US on YouTube, and right here at twitch.tv/Den of Geek TV. We have more Secret Invasion coming your way in the coming weeks, so get your Skrully selves together. We are also at Marvel Standom on Twitter and Instagram. Drop us a line. Let us know your burning questions. Tell us your Skrull theories. And don't forget to check out our other shows on the Den of Geek Network, like The Brilliant Talking Strange and DC Standom, hosted by yours truly. If you came in late, you can watch this entire episode on denofgeek.com or at our YouTube home at Den of Geek US. And don't forget to check out past episodes there as well. Thanks to our producer, Andrew Halley, best there is. Special shout out, Mike Wright. If you're listening on audio, he's the one making this show all can be. Thanks to Lee Parham, who keeps everything rolling in the comments and moderating everything, making sure you're behaving. Most of all, though, thank you all for watching, listening, following, and subscribing. This has been Marvel Standom on the Den of Geek Network. I am not a Skrull, I swear. Till next time, remember, folks, we stand together.